Hello again, everybody, and welcome into Gamecock Central Radio. Scott Hood joining me, Emerson Phillips, to talk Gamecock basketball. Scott, rough weekend for Gamecock basketball fans. I think there was a lot of optimism that South Carolina was going to be in the NCAA tournament, and we found out yesterday that the Gamecocks are not in. So it's an NIT bid for South Carolina. The Gamecocks will host High Point in the first round of the NIT tomorrow night, 7 o'clock tip at the Colonial Life Arena. Scott, wanted to get your reaction, first of all, on the Gamecocks being left out of the NCAA tournament. A lot of folks felt like Carolina would be in. Looks like that third loss to Georgia was the nail in the Gamecocks' coffin.
Yeah, Emerson, I thought Frank Martin summed it up pretty well at his press conference yesterday. He said that following the road win at Arkansas to close out the regular season, I think the Gamecocks felt they were in pretty good shape. But then I think those last 20 seconds of the quarterfinal loss to Georgia, I think are going to haunt the Gamecocks all season, where they let a guy escape a trap in their midcourt, drive to the basket, score a layup to tie the game. And then, of course, the Gamecocks' last true possession of the game, where Sandora Stonewall was stripped of the ball and he ended up committing a loose ball foul, and Georgia ended up hitting the winning free throw. So those last 20 seconds are really going to be painful to watch for Frank Martin and his team through the off season. As for the snub, I thought there was an pretty electric atmosphere over at the Alumni Center yesterday. I think the crowd was into it. There's really a big crowd. The band was there. The cheerleaders were there. It was a good atmosphere. But going in, you knew South Carolina was clearly on the bubble. It could go either way. Their RPI was in the 60s. So based on history, you knew that they could be in or they could be out. And of course, they ended up being out. But in my opinion, Emerson, the bigger issue is how the tournament selection committee treated the SEC, not just this year, but how they've done that in years past. In my opinion, the fact that the SEC only got 3 teams in is a joke. It seems to me that the tournament selection committee, for some reason, has historically had a hostile attitude toward the SEC. And I thought, in fact, I watched the SEC Network last night, and I thought one of the analysts hit it dead on. He said that the SEC basketball is, in his opinion, is unfairly held to a higher standard because of the conference's success in football. That because of the success in football, there may be some sort of movement behind in some of the other conferences to keep the SEC down in basketball, and I would not discount that. I think there's some truth to that, and the fact that Joe Castiglione, who's the Oklahoma AD, was the chairman of the tournament selection committee, and he of course has publicly supported Bob Stoops' anti-SEC rhetoric in the past. So I think there's a history there, has been history in the past. And the fact that schools like South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia did not get into the tournament, even though they were ranked much higher in the RPI than Syracuse and Tulsa. In fact, I think last night I was watching on the SC Network. Joe Lenardi described the Tulsa pick. He said it was the worst at-large selection in the last 20 years, and I pretty much agree with that. And so it sounds like their attitude was ABS, anybody but the SEC. And if you watch Frank Martin's press conference yesterday, if you watch the replay of it, the very first question I asked him about that. He's been very outspoken about the SEC's lack of respect that they get nationally, and I think that sort of manifested itself again yesterday. And I think the SEC. I think Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, I think this is a test for him. I think he needs to challenge the NCAA and demand answers as to why the SEC gets no respect come late March when it comes to NCAA tournament selection time.
Scott, I can't say I was completely surprised that the Gamecocks did not get in based on a couple of factors. Number one, strength of schedule. South Carolina was about number 296, I believe it was, in strength of schedule. So no real shock there. And you couple that with the 3 losses to Georgia, obviously did not help the Gamecocks' cause. But what really did surprise me was 3 teams in particular that got in ahead of South Carolina, Tulsa being the first. The Gamecocks beat Tulsa at the Paradise Jam, a neutral court game back in November. It was very early in the season, but the Gamecocks beat them head-to-head. Vanderbilt got in. South Carolina only played Vandy one time this year, and the Gamecocks beat Vanderbilt at the Colonial Life Arena. And then you have Syracuse, which was 71st. I believe I saw you posted on Twitter in the RPI. The Gamecocks were 65th. Syracuse was 71st. Syracuse had lost 5 of the last 6 games of the season, and they lost in the first round of the ACC tournament. And somehow, inexplicably, all 3 of these teams are in, and the Gamecocks are left out. It's just a bitter pill to swallow.
No, it is a bitter pill to swallow. And in fact, I tweeted out as well, Emerson, as we saw it, that I think CBS's fingerprints are all over the Syracuse selection for TV ratings. That would not surprise me at all. If CBS, now anyone who thinks that CBS is paying billions of dollars to the NCAA and they don't have some sort of voice in the selection process is naive and gullible. Don't believe that for a second. I think CBS has some influence, and I think the Syracuse pick is strong evidence of that, in my opinion, because of Syracuse's national name, Jim Boeheim being the coach. So remember, here's a team whose coach was banned for 9 games this season because of cheating and academic fraud. Yeah. Yet they get into the NCAA tournament, and as you mentioned, lost 5 of the last 6 games. They didn't deserve to be in the tournament, but I think because of their name and because they're in the ACC, but primarily because of their name and their nationally known brand, they got into the tournament. To me, that's the only reason why Syracuse got in.
Yeah, and
over schools like Syracuse, over schools like South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and some other more deserving schools.
Yeah, and speaking of scandals, I won't even get started on Frank Haith at Tulsa and what happened with Missouri. We won't get into all that. We'll save that for another time. So, Scott, you get lemons, you make lemonade. Gamecocks get a number 1 seed in the NIT. Let's talk about tomorrow night's game. It'll be High Point, a team that a lot of folks listening today may not know a lot about, but this is a pretty doggone good program out of the Big South.
It is a very good program. Scott Cherry, some people may know, Scott Cherry is the head coach of High Point, and he was an assistant coach under Darren Horn in Horn's first year here at South Carolina. And Emerson, more than one person has pointed out that after Cherry left, the South Carolina program didn't do too well under Darren Horn. So a lot of people think that maybe Cherry's exit to take the High Point job led in part to the downfall of the Gamecock program under Darren Horn, and I think there's probably some basis to that. So, but he's done a very good job building the High Point program. They won 4 or 5 straight Big South regular season championships. Apparently, they must struggle to win the tournament because obviously the Big South is a 1 bid league, so everything depends on the conference tournament. The High Point has done well in the regular season, but they haven't been able to win the conference tournaments. They haven't been in the NCAAs too much. But this is a very good basketball team that's going to come to Columbia, and I think the storyline with Scott Cherry is going to be one I think the media is going to jump all over, and I would not be surprised at all if Scott Cherry is actually the pregame or postgame about his time here at South Carolina. So, to me, that's the main storyline. And because obviously no one really down here at South Carolina really knows all that much about High Point because we don't see them play all that much. The Big South is a very good basketball league. I think it's underrated nationally, but again, it is a 1 bid league. So you can do well in the regular season, but if you don't win that conference tournament, you don't get into the NCAAs, which is High Point has experienced the last few years.
All right, High Point is 21-10. 7 o'clock tip, Tuesday night, March 15th at the Colonial Life Arena. It'll be televised on ESPNU. Tickets are on sale now. They're $15, and it's general admission, so it's a 32-team tournament in the NIT. You win 3 games. You go to the Final Four at Madison Square Garden, and because the Gamecocks are number 1 seed, they'll be at home as long as they remain in the tournament. And if they reach the Final Four, obviously that's at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Scott, if the Gamecocks can handle High Point, they'll get the winner of Georgia Tech and Houston. And Georgia Tech is a pretty good team as well. They beat Clemson twice this year, and that's a team that could present some problems in round 2 if that's what ends up being a matchup.
Yeah, I think it's not a coincidence, Emerson, that I think the NIT committee here is certainly eyeing an SEC versus ACC battle in the second round with South Carolina and Georgia Tech. So that'll be a great game. I think that's a game that could potentially draw a pretty big crowd because obviously there's still a lot of old school Gamecock fans who still remember the days of when the Gamecocks won the ACC and had all those battles. So I think a game against Georgia Tech would be a very popular draw in terms of attendance. I think Colonial Life Arena would definitely be rocking for that one.
Question.
If they would host Georgia Tech at home.
Yeah, Tech's got Houston. That'll be in Atlanta, and that game will be on Wednesday night. So Georgia Tech and Houston, the 4-5 matchup in this section of the bracket. And we look at the rest of this quadrant here, Scott. It's Washington and Long Beach State. That's a 3 and a 6. And San Diego State, coached by Steve Fisher, perennial tournament team in the NIT this year. Some people felt like they were a snub for the NCAA tournament. They're 25-9, and they get Indiana-Fort Worth in the 2-7 matchup. So that's the Gamecocks' quarter of the bracket. And let's talk about the rest of the bracket as a whole. Scott, Clemson did not get an NIT invite. LSU opted not to participate in the postseason in any way, shape, or form after they did not get into the NCAA tournament. Georgia got a 3 seed. They're on the opposite half of the bracket from South Carolina. St. Bonaventure, Valpo, and Monmouth, the other number 1 seeds.
Yeah, I think overall, it's a strong NIT field from the teams that I saw. I think obviously you talk about a team like San Diego State. I believe they were the Mountain West regular season champions. So again, if you're like the SEC, I'm sure the Mountain West is going to feel like they're being disrespected because of the fact that the regular season champion did not get an at-large berth into the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, I mean, obviously you wonder how some of these teams are going to react to the disappointment not making the NCAA tournament, and with South Carolina certainly being one of those schools. So if South Carolina can recover mentally and come out and they played well on tomorrow night against High Point, I think they should win that game. And then at some point, either over the weekend or next Monday night, they'll probably host either Georgia Tech or Houston at the Colonial Life Arena. So again, yeah, I think Frank Martin said it yesterday. They want to view these games as not only as reward for the seniors for this year, but also perhaps as a first step toward preparing for next season and some playing time for some of these players that are coming back next year. But certainly, I am glad that guys like Michael Carrera can continue their careers, and you hope he can play tomorrow night. Obviously, that hip injury kept him out of the Georgia game, and that certainly hurt South Carolina, no doubt. So be interesting to see if he can play tomorrow night. But certainly for the seniors, I'm glad to get to play at least one more basketball game.
Yeah, it really felt for the Gamecocks seniors that had a 24-win season, and I saw that South Carolina becomes the first major conference team in history to win 24 games and not get an invite to the NCAA tournament. Yeah. Hard to figure. Andy Demetra was on Twitter. He looked all the way back to 2002. No 24-win team in a major conference had ever been left out of the tournament. And as far as we can tell, since the field expanded to 64 teams years ago, every major conference team that won 24 games or more had gotten into the NCAA tournament. So South Carolina becomes the first to be denied. But the Gamecocks do have this number 1 seed in the NIT. Scott, I see it going one of two ways. Either the Gamecocks are so disappointed that they didn't get in the tournament that maybe they're not emotionally invested in this NIT, or they're angry and they use it as a springboard to success in this tournament, which could carry over into next year. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think Gamecock fans obviously hope that it's the latter. And I think it will be the latter. I think Frank Martin's a good enough coach, and I think you get guys like Michael Carrera and their character. I think they'll come out tomorrow night, and I think they'll play well against High Point, and I think they'll advance, and we'll have another home game here this coming weekend. I can't see the Georgia Tech or Houston. It should be a busy weekend at the CLA with the women's team playing probably playing 2 home games, and the men's basketball team perhaps playing in the second round game, NIT game. It's going to be a pretty busy weekend over there at the arena.
Certainly, it certainly will be. Man, a sublime weekend. A lot of folks didn't see it coming. The Gamecocks left out of the NCAA tournament, but optimism is high that the Gamecocks will be able to win the NIT again. Twice they've won it this century and have a chance to do it again this year. And, Scott, I know it's a disappointment. Obviously, you don't get in the tournament, but if you win the NIT, that is a feather in the cap of the program, and it has frequently served as a springboard to success. for programs that have won this tournament in the past. So maybe that'll be the case for the Gamecocks as we put a bow on the 2016 season.
Certainly the Gamecocks have a good history with the NIT with the back-to-back titles in 05 and 06. So we'll see how they do again. I think they can win a couple of games, and I'd like to see them at least get to New York City. I think playing in Madison Square Garden has to be a thrill for any basketball player, considering that arena's history. And just making it to New York City would be a great achievement for this program as a stepping stone into next season.
Certainly would. Scott, great update today. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's Scott Hood, and I'm Emerson Phillips, Gamecock Basketball Report here on Gamecock Central Radio. And we'll have more Gamecock news and information coming your way soon here on Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for joining us.